India's rape law, Section 375 of the Indian Penal Code, has an exception which is referred to as MRE, or marital rape exception, or exception 2. The exception protects men who have forced non consensual sex with their wives from criminal prosecution. This exception was challenged in the Delhi High Court, and a division bench of the court has delivered a split verdict, with one judge, Justice Rajiv Shakhter, striking down the exception, and the other, Justice Harishankar, upholding it. This is your weekly fix. I'm Smita Nair. Justice Shakhter said the exception in question is steeped in patriarchy and misogyny, and the classification, in his opinion, is unreasonable and manifestly arbitrary, as it seems to convey that forced sex outside marriage is real rape, and the same act within marriage is anything else but rape. Justice Shakhter seemed not to agree with his brother judge. He favored the continuation of the protection of the law that the law afforded men. He said what distinguishes the relationship of wife and husband from all other relationships of women and man is the legitimate expectation of sex. He stated that this exception does not violate a woman's right to life, liberty, or equal protection under law. The judges differed on many points on the importance of consent, on whether other laws in the IPC, like 498A dealing with cruelty, the Domestic Violence Act, in any way compensate as legal remedies for a woman who's been raped by her husband. They also differed on the potential difficulty in gathering evidence. The union government, on its part, wants this legal protection, which sanctions force and violence, to stay. The court had appointed senior advocates Rebecca John and Rajshekhar Rao as amicus curiae. Amicus curiae is Latin for friend of court. They are the ones who assist the court by furnishing information or advice regarding questions of law or fact. Both were in favor of striking down the exception. Now, there are broadly 5 or 6 arguments advanced by those who want this protection to stay. Are these arguments, these fears or concerns, legitimate, wholly or partially? How do those advocating for its removal, those who've worked closely with women facing violence in the domestic setting, counter these arguments? Let's speak to Advocate Kirti Singh, legal advisor to AIDWA, one of the petitioners in the case. Also with us, Kavita Krishnan, feminist activist and secretary, All India Progressive Women's Association. Thank you to the two of you for making the time for speaking to us here at Scroll.
Thank you.
Kavita, of everything that Justice Harishankar has said in his reasoning, what did you find most problematic or disturbing? At one point in the judgment, Justice Harishankar says, forced sexual intercourse between a husband and a wife cannot be treated as rape. At worst, it can be treated as sexual abuse, as is clear from perusal of the definition of cruelty found in the Domestic Violence Act. Then he goes on to say, a wife cannot prescribe a particular punishment that can be imposed on the husband to, quote, satisfy her ego. I had to read that multiple times to ascertain if I read it correctly.
Well, to me, I think that Justice Harishankar has actually done us the service of showing us what is most egregious, what is most dangerous about retaining this provision. Because his defense of the marital rape exception actually shows us that the marital rape exception is a rape culture enshrined inside the rape law. And he does that by saying things like this, let me read this line out to you. He says, if the wife refuses and the husband nonetheless has sex with her, what is he describing? He is describing the lack of consent on part of a woman and the husband's, the use, the forcible act of sex on part of a man, and the relationship being that of wife and husband, right? He says, however, one may disapprove of the act, it cannot be equated with the act of ravishing by a stranger, nor can the impact on the wife in such a situation be equated with the impact of a woman on a woman who is raped by a stranger. Now, what is this saying? This is something which is not there in your law. Your law does not, speak. If you read the rape law does not say that rape is only stranger rape. In fact, all over the world, it is well recognized that the vast number of cases of rape involve people who are well known to and trusted by the victim, whether it is child abuse, whether it is the rape of adult women or even men. It is trusted people, trusted persons, or persons in power in some position of authority. These are the persons most likely to inflict sexual violence on someone, right? Basically, to say that only stranger rape and this use of this word ravishment, which is like something out of an epic poem, like the Iliad, or, like only Helen of Troy can be raped, only Draupadi can be raped, or, whatever it is, Sita can be raped. What is this? This is exoticizing it and saying that the ordinary, so this is a male judge. Uh, Dissing the experience of women, dissing the experience of mocking at the experience of a woman's experience of being raped, right? This is rape culture, pure and simple. This is dismissing rape culture is something that trivializes rape, that blames women for rape, that accuses women of exaggerating their experience of rape, that says what you're experiencing, you may say it's rape, but it's not really rape because you
Right.
knew this man, because you had a relationship with this man, because your relationship with this man, the fact that you once consented to having, he was your boyfriend, or you knew him, or he was your teacher, or you kissed him once, or you had a drink with him once, or he's your husband, whatever it is. This basically means that you cannot today turn around and say that you had not consented to this act of sex with him. How can this be allowed? You know, this is really not about whether, anybody should file a case, a criminal complaint or not. This is not, about the way the media very loosely uses the term of criminalization of marital rape. That's not the point. I'm far from wanting criminalization of anything. The criminal option is actually something very rarely accessed by wives in cases of domestic violence, let alone rape. Just as they only 1% of women actually experiencing domestic violence actually access the criminal option. Likewise, in marital rape cases, also a small fraction will eventually access it if they are allowed to access it. So
Right.
that's not the issue here. The
Right.
issue here is that this provision being on the books here is a slap on the face of all of us. It's an insult to all of us. It is enshrining rape culture in the minds of every judge in this land, and every woman who walks into any courtroom in this land walks into a courtroom that is filled with this rubbish. So that is what we are talking about getting rid of.
Right. It's interesting you talk about only 1% of women who face violence in the domestic setting actually accessing the criminal justice system, because ironically, that very NCRB data has been sort of turned on its head by, and I almost saw propaganda to say that how these laws are misused and how husbands and in-laws are sort of being harassed by wives. I want to go to Ms. Kirti Singh in a moment to sort of rebut the arguments one by one that have been put forth by those who want to retain this marital rape exception. But very quickly, Kavita Krishnan, can you talk about what the data tells us on the prevalence of violence in the domestic setting? As also, what are the lived experiences of women? I mean, and the reason I ask you is this because I don't want to name names, but I've listened to certain male lawyers in particular who refer to, the violation of women in the domestic, in the marital setting as, some sort of an anodyne act.
I find that deeply disturbing. I have also heard this repeatedly, including on television and so on. And I find it deeply disturbing when they say that, oh, this is a certain sort of male fantasy when they talk about marital rape as make-up sex. So they say this. Literally, I have heard this said by, secular lawyers, progressive lawyers on public television, saying, oh, it's actually a way of making up arguments and all of that. I mean, my God. Awful completely. So the point is, you don't get to decide that, right? What is the woman's experience of it? That is the point, right? If you really made up an argument, I mean, then the wife wouldn't be out trying to say that you raped her, right? Now, the data shows basically, if you look at NCRB data, and I'm talking about NCR, let's look at NFHS data, which is actually the most informative on this because it is not crimes data. It's not data that is collated to look at crime, right? So it is just asking women in a neutral setting, not asking them to go file complaints. It is simply asking them, have you experienced these acts? So there they are certainly reporting domestic violence. They're not only reporting domestic violence, a large number of women are justifying domestic violence. They're saying I deserved it. Okay, because this is the socialization of women in our society, where they are saying, and not only do I experience violence, but my husband has a right to punish me. And I do not have a right to complain. But large number of women are also, as part of the domestic violence, they are also complaining about, they are also reporting, I won't say complaining, reporting that they are subjected to acts of sex which they are not comfortable with and they have not consented to. This includes objecting to certain acts of sex, but also simply objecting to sex itself and having it forced on them. So, a variety of non consensual acts, a large number of women are reporting. Okay. And clearly, all of this, it is not that these women are saying this because they want criminalization. They are not seeking a criminal recourse, whatever it is. Okay. And all of us who have worked in the women's movement know that a criminal recourse is not something that women are first and foremost demanding. Okay. But the point is that as part of domestic violence, where domestic violence exists, it's ridiculous to say that our husbands are violent.
Right.
Drawing the line at rape. Okay. So obviously that is also part and parcel of the package. And entitlement, where that interesting word that Justice Harishankar uses, Judge Harishankar uses, which is the expectation of sex.
Right.
A spouse may have an expectation of sex in marriage from the other spouse, but expectation is not entitlement. You can't say I
Exactly.
have an entitlement to it. I don't have a right to expect it from you. I cannot
Right.
say it's my
Right. We'll sort of try and reconnect with Kavita. But Miss Kirti Singh, can I take this question to you though? And you are familiar with this because you've been working in this field for decades now. One of the main arguments that has been made by those who were opposed to your petition in court is that there is already remedy available in the Indian Penal Code to deal with marital rape under sections perhaps pertaining to the Domestic Violence Act or 498A relating to cruelty or
I'm
sections
so sorry.
relating
I think
to grievous
we got
hurt.
cut off.
Yes, I'll come to you in a second. So the fact that redressal is the claim that is legal redressal is available for spousal violence. So why do you need to remove this exception?
So, as you know, Section 498A deals with cruelty to women and deals with dowry harassment. The Domestic Violence Act deals with various kinds of violence that can be inflicted on a woman at home. But the domestic, and it is economic violence and verbal and physical and mental and sexual violence. So it has a wide definition of violence, but the act is essentially a civil law as distinguished from a criminal law. So, in a criminal law, uh, like rape law, it's a completely different. You are punishing somebody for a crime, whereas as far as domestic violence is concerned, the court gives protection orders under the act. The court gives residence orders under the act, and monetary relief if this is asked for, including injunctions like you won't throw the woman out of the house or that you won't go near close to the house. So it doesn't give the kind of it cannot be compared with rape. It is another kind of relief altogether. It is not in a rape case. You are alleging that somebody has committed a serious heinous crime and should be punished for it. You file an FIR and the police investigates and then of course takes him into custody because
Right.
he has committed a crime against the state. Similarly, when you try to compare rape with cruelty to women, it can't be done because cruelty is a different offense. You may have elements of sexual violence which can come in there, but that doesn't mean that it can replace rape or that rape shouldn't be on the statute book at all for as far as married women are concerned, because married women, like any other women, and you cannot distinguish between a married woman or another woman. I mean, if penetrative sexual assault is committed on a woman, then it's a different kind of crime. It's not only assault, but it's penetrative sexual assault. So the law itself defines it differently. And how can we then say it is included in something else, which is enough? Because
Right.
it's a completely different set of guidelines apply here. A woman who's been raped has special provisions. Here, there are special provisions for her now in the CRPC, and she's entitled to them, including counseling. Whereas in a marital rape case, nothing happens. The exception, and it's interesting that Justice Saddar says that what is the effect on the married woman is that it mars the woman victim physically, psychologically, and emotionally. He admits that. So, in sharp contrast to what Justice Hari Shankar has said, that a stranger rape cannot do that. And we know how women are tortured at home, sometimes for years. How we know how domestic violence plays out in the house, and we know that this can keep on occurring, and still a woman can't do anything. And it's been pointed out in the judgment. It's been pointed out that under no circumstance can a woman allege rape. That is, if she is being repeatedly raped, if she is ill, if he is ill, has a communicable disease, or in any other circumstance, if she doesn't feel like it. A woman doesn't give a universal license to sexual intercourse. And I just want to say, because the theory behind it is actually from British common law. It is old British, the theory of coverture, where
Correct.
where the wife gives up all her rights and to the husband on marriage, and she is considered to be a property and a chattel, and the husband will treat her in any case, and therefore he cannot be, accused of rape. Whereas
Right.
now we are living in a post-constitutional ethos. We are living where the rule of law is supposed to prevail, where we have Article 14, which says equality before law and justice, where we have Article 21, which says that a woman shall be entitled to live with dignity, to her sexual autonomy, to her bodily integrity, and so on. So it's true. And the concept of marriage is totally different now. The
Right.
concept of marriage is totally different. It's a modern concept when the two equals are supposed to get married. They are supposed to have respect for each other and for the thoughts of each other. And they should have equal rights within the marriage and outside the marriage, and equal right to say in all matters concerning marriage. And certainly, they have not given an unrevocable
Rights. To
license to the
right.
husband to keep
Right.
on raping. And
Right.
what happens if if she's menstruating? What happens if she's really not well?
Right.
Even then, our law is so harsh that it says that no. And
Yes.
it's not at all a nuanced judgment. The opponents of this judgment are
Right.
not nuanced.
At
They
all.
do
Correct.
not admit even that there are certain situations. They
Right.
talk about the institution of marriage as if
Right.
it has to be preserved at all costs, you
Right.
know. And
Yes. Yes.
even Justice Stagdar, forget us, we've been fighting for change or for recognition of marital rape since the 1990s.
True.
1993 was the first time that we fought for recognition of marital rape. But
True.
forget
Long before the
us.
Justice Verma Committee in 2013 recommended it.
Oh, yes, but then EDWA had made five bills.
Right.
Five bills it had given to the government. Each
Right.
time, each bill was an improvement. And
Correct.
finally, in 2012, there was a
Right.
legislation which was brought in, which was then changed to some extent after,
Right.
in keeping with the women's groups' point of
True.
view and so on. But
Right.
So Justice Shankar also said that,
Right.
it's not an irrevocable consent that
Consent.
you give,
No.
and
And
that it's important to be able to withdraw the consent at any time that you
any
want.
point, right? I'll come to the question of consent a little ahead on the show. Justice Shaktir also sort of echoed what you said earlier about correctly defining what the crime is. I mean, why rape
Mm,
needs to be called rape, and why other sections cannot take care of an offense that is distinct from the offenses that come under the other IPC
mm,
provisions. Very briefly, I'll read from what he said. He said, the fact that certain ingredients of the offense covered under the rape law are found in other provisions of the IPC, like causing hurt or grievous hurt or cruelty, does not provide a satisfactory answer as to why sexual assault, which is synonymous rape, should not be labeled as rape when the offense is committed on an adult woman by her husband. Kavita Krishnan, another question, and I have to come to this because on your screens you can see the questions that are coming up from our viewers, and there are at least three men who have spoken about what I expected would be the question on so-called misuse. The
Yeah,
argument has been that doing away with this exception will mean women will use this to harass their husbands, and the claim has been,
right.
and to an extent, I know this has been propaganda that 498A has been misused, and similarly, this will happen too. I just want to read a question. Somebody who goes by the name Happy Man has written to us saying, if sorry, no, that's not the question, the one below it. Colin has spoken about
Hmm.
how this will be misused in the day of false claims on dowry, harassment, etc. Men don't want to live
Right.
in fear of another false claim. Unless there is a
Right.
law to protect men against false claim, we don't need, quote, these bias laws.
Right. See, I think that there are two, three responses to this. But first, because I got cut off last time, let me just quickly tell you that NFHS data basically shows you that around 83% of married women are actually reporting that their husband I mean, they force unwanted sexual acts on them. And at least 13% of currently married women are reporting a former husband as a perpetrator. Okay. So, once married women are reporting a former husband as a perpetrator. Okay. And of these, and of the 40% of women who are reporting domestic violence, uh, in NFHS data. So this is, they are not, only 1% are saying that we went down the criminal route. So, that puts your misuse thing in perspective, right? It is actually deeply underused. The misuse claims are not based on any serious studies. They are based on a complete mischievous twisting of NCRB data, which is looking at data and saying that, suppose you look at suicides of men, who have committed suicide, you just pick up all the men who are married and say that these married men have committed suicide because they're married. That doesn't make sense, right?
Right,
How can
absolutely.
you show me that these men had that their wives had filed criminal complaints against them? Then I will believe you, maybe. You haven't shown me that data. You are not, without showing me that data, you are just wanting me to believe that all married men who committed suicide have committed suicide because their wives filed domestic violence complaints against them under 498A. That is absolutely not there, right? Instead, you have data as well as studies by women's groups, which are focus studies in certain states and certain regions and so on, which show you, absolutely show you a great reluctance on the part of women to use criminal law. And I do not have any quarrel with that reluctance, frankly, because criminal law, in my opinion, is a very, uh, it's a very unwieldy weapon. In our country, it doesn't deliver results very quickly. It is not an easy path to walk. You get results very delayed. So it doesn't really always feel or taste like justice. And for a wife who wants her husband, usually the wife wants the husband to stop beating her, to stop raping her. She wants him to start behaving like a loving and responsible husband who takes care of her and her children. Okay, this in India, this is specific to India, by the way. this rubbish that this justice is saying in this thing about, oh, in India the institution of marriage is sacred and all, that is all complete nonsense. What is unique to India, in fact, is the fact that in India marriage is, for a lot of women, marriage is sort of like, it is like your career sort of thing. Your, marriage is your safety net in life. It is your lot in life, where somebody is going to take care of you. And basically, if that someone is not going to take care of you, and you are suddenly in a situation where you are being treated extremely badly, you want to fix that. You want help to fix that. So, very often when they come to us, they basically want us to negotiate, to talk. And part of the reason, even filing a complaint sometimes is to put pressure to say, stop behaving like this. Okay, so I have no quarrel with that. I will never pressurize a woman that you must file a criminal complaint. Now, that said, I will say, so if this is the case with domestic violence laws, it's going to be the same case with marital rape. Now, that said, to the person asking about misuse, I'm going to say that, look, the men who are raising these issues, um, assuming that you're coming from a place of good faith, I will request you to look once again at our society and try to question the propaganda that women are in fact in this place of power and able to harass you, and that men are the victims in this situation of any kind. You see, misuse is the point is that whenever the women at all use the law, it is termed as misuse. Misuse of the law does happen, and that misuse happens by the police, by the way. So when a police swoop in and arrest an entire family under 498A, including children and elderly people who have nothing to do with the abuse, that's on the police. That is not the woman's fault. The woman is reporting abuse at the hands of certain people. There is absolutely no call to go and arrest everyone there. But that is on the police. Police misuse so many laws. They behave high-handedly under so many laws. But instead of talking about that, if you start making it about, why do we only talk about misuse when it comes to social laws, laws about women, laws about Dalits, which are there to protect women and Dalits? Ask
Absolutely.
ourselves that, right?
Absolutely.
So,
SC,
yeah.
SCST Act also. That is, I mean, every time you talk
Yes.
about the Act, you talk about the misuse of the Act. There are so many
Yeah.
other provisions
So we
which
are
are never
talking about
discussed.
misuse where women and Dalits are actually really facing so much violence and they continue to be killed. One
Yeah.
last thing there, that the Delhi High Court has observed in a case that women are most likely to, the most dangerous place for women is their marital home. The place where they are most likely to be killed is their
Right.
marital home. And this is not just India, by the way, this is worldwide. Even in the most advanced countries in the world, women are most likely to be killed by an intimate partner.
Right. Intimate partner violence is, in fact, responsible for in the top of two or three sort of causes of the of deaths of women, even in America. Missing. Can you also sort of reflect on this, because this is a question? I'm
Yes,
like, 7 or 8 people have written the same question on this sort of misuse. You have
yes.
experience. I mean, you've been working in this field for very long. Please tell us. For example, one gentleman, I presume, has written in to say, tomorrow the husband will be sent to jail for touching his wife for 1 second without her wish. And I mean, where are these questions coming from? I mean, this
I
would
don't
seem.
know. I don't know because this is far from the reality. The
Right.
reality is that women have a far greater stake in staying in the marriage than the man does. The reality is that she's completely socially and economically vulnerable outside the marriage. The reality is that under the Indian laws, she gets nothing to live by. And she's often deserted along with her children. We did a big study of 400 women, and we saw that this is what happens. More than 70% of the women are deserted, abandoned, whatever, along with their children. There is no law of marital property in India. So, a woman can keep on asking for maintenance for 7 years in court and not get it. So why is she going to get out of this marriage? And why is she going to be so, uh, you know, hunky-dory about filing a case against him. That's totally wrong. It's not the reality. The actuality is that very few women actually file a case, and they file a case when they have absolutely no option open or left. You know,
Right.
and
Right.
in we did a study for the NCW of all things, of all institutions, on 498A. And I won't speak too much because it's a lengthy study. But what it says is that it's not an option which is exercised easily by women. It's underused. 80%, in fact, that is NCRB data, are found chargeable offences. What they file is not something which is dismissed, it's charged. So, prima
Right.
facie, there is a case
Right.
in more than 80% cases. And
Right.
that it also says that it's underused and that it needs to be strengthened properly. That
Correct.
police also use it, and if you go to the police, they start trying to make you reconcile with your husband and agree to some settlement which is completely unequal, and if settlements are reached by women, they are not to their advantage. So,
Right.
women are not there to, and women are dowry debts, and the whole dowry thing has shown us how women are systematically tortured within their homes, how traumatized a life they live. So it's not if people don't want to recognize that, they needn't. But if they think that women are misusing the laws, they aren't. Women are hardly using the laws that are meant for them. And the earlier Supreme Court judges recognized that, and they have several hurdles to go through before they can live outside a marriage. And and the biggest obstacle is the police, because when you
Right.
go to the police, they are not likely to give you a very sympathetic ear.
Right.
You know, your
I
lawyer.
right.
And Justice Sabda says that if there is misuse in particular cases, then the law is there to deal with. He also makes the remark that all laws are misused in India,
Right. Right.
especially social legislation.
Correct.
They allege
Right.
social
Right.
legislation, but all laws are misused. And the
Right.
court there are sections in the IPC, there are sections which can be used. The court is not bound to agree to them. The court is not bound to, this thing.
Right.
But their right to make a complaint cannot be
Right.
questioned.
Right.
Cannot be questioned.
In fact, just very quickly, I spent a fair amount of time with a not-for-profit that works with women who face violence in the domestic setting. As an
Mm.
observer, I was writing a piece, this was a few years ago, and
Yeah,
I sort of observed what happens in the police station.
yeah,
I put this question to the social worker who was with this woman, badly battered, and had approached the police, and I found almost sort of nonchalant sort of response from the police, and I asked this advocate social worker on why conviction
mm,
rates are so low. And she said the primary reason why conviction rates are so low is because
exactly.
there is deliberately incompetent investigation by the police, and the fact that the police at the end of the day are part of society, and there is a deep bias against women who seek a recourse in criminal justice against a man she is married to, and that is the main reason, she says, in her experience, there is a low conviction in
And
498A
they
domestic.
themselves believe कि एक थप्पड़ मार दिया तो क्या हो गया,
क्या
you
हुआ?
know, क्या
Correct.
हुआ. And they
Correct.
themselves, they don't take down they don't take evidence, they don't take statements of the close people, they don't even take her statement properly, which is why
Right.
there had to be such a struggle on the fact that women victims of violence should go to the magistrate to record the statement.
Right. And I don't know how many of our viewers, many of whom I assume would be young, know the struggle that people like Miss Kirti Singh and her organizations undertook in the 80s, etc., to sort of criminalize this act of cruelty within marriage. Kavita Krishnan, I want to get to the question. The
What
second most asked question is that if you label spousal sexual abuse as rape, you're destroying the institution of marriage, and the state has a legitimate interest in protecting this sort of institution of marriage.
See, I'll just say that I won't go into this, all that thing about why the state should protect or not protect. I mean, there I won't go there. I'll simply say that if you value any institution, surely you should not want that institute. What is a threat to the institution of marriage more than violence inside that institution, right? So, I mean, after all, spousal violence, and wife battering inside that institution, the fact that a woman is unsafe inside that institution, that her dignity is unsafe inside that institution, that is the worst threat to that institution, and to the respect of that institution enjoys, frankly. Okay. And I'll tell you that I don't think, when I find these organizations like Save Family and all, which frankly I think is, that's a propaganda name. They should be called, the Save Patriarchy, patriarchal privilege bachao, that is what they should be called, because
Right,
they're not trying to save family, quite frankly. So,
right,
what I think is that I think they're not speaking for men. I think they're doing Indian men, and especially they're doing Indian men a great, great disservice. Because frankly, in my experience, and I'll recount to you a story very briefly, where Kirti Singh and I were on a panel in Rajya Sabha TV, where two gentlemen, lawyers on the other side, sort of walked out because they were deeply offended by, they kept interrupting us and were very irritated because we tried to hold our ground. So they walked out in protest, and these audience, largely young men, some young women, from some college in Noida or something like that. So they were, not exposed to these issues at all, and they appeared to be clapping when those men, were speaking and when they walked out and all. So the anchor got a little disturbed, and she thought that, the thing has gone to pieces, and she wanted to shut it down. So we actually suggested to her that, no, why don't you ask these, your audience what they're thinking? Let us find out. So she very tentatively kind of went forward and asked them, what do you think? And they were tremendously vocal in saying that they were disgusted by the arguments that these gentlemen were giving in support of the exception. They were completely convinced by what we were saying. They were saying they didn't know such an exception existed. And they
this,
said, when we marry, we don't want our marriage to exist based on this, our relationship with our wife to exist based on, our right to rape our wives. My God, so they said, we don't want this. We want marriage to be based on trust and respect and love. We don't want it to be based on fear and, this thing. So then she asked them, why were you clapping? And they said, see, we didn't want to hoot and boo because we thought that wouldn't suit a TV studio. We didn't know what noise to make in order to show our, our dissent. So we
correct.
just clapped. And I've found that happen earlier also, that, audiences in India tend to do this. They use clapping both for, sorrow as
Bowing
well
and
as joy and all of that. So it was very interesting. And this was young men largely, and barring one or two of them, most of them were totally, no, untouched by this propaganda that we need to fear being falsely accused and whatnot. Okay. So I
Right,
think that we should have much greater trust in our society. We should remember that Indian men and Indian society has also changed in many ways. I see this change all the time. I see Indian men. I remember a young working class man in my hometown. So gently, helping me care for my elderly father, and change, diapers and so on, because he had changed, he knew how to do that because he could change his baby daughter's diaper. And what a loving, what a wonderful man he was. And come on, I mean, we have this in our society, and let us not disrespect them by allowing these loud, completely boorish groups to speak for our society. Okay, they
right,
are not
right,
speaking for our society.
right. In fact, Justice Harishankar also, Justice Shakter also talks about, when this sort of argument has been made about institution of marriage and safeguarding and preservation, and he says, if marriage is a tyranny, what's the point of sort of continuing with that kind of
Exactly. And if you, and this 83% of
And the
women
fact
saying,
that, sorry.
Yeah,
The fact that the state can't have any legitimate reason in keeping a violent marriage uh,
Yes.
alive,
Go.
or
Right.
in letting a violent marriage sleep.
absolutely,
It cannot.
absolutely.
You can't say the state has a legitimate reason to uphold the institution of marriage or family, regardless of what is
Right.
happening
Regardless,
within the
exactly.
family. Or, if it's a site for violence, sure, you have to
Yeah.
address it. The Constitution comes in.
This, in fact, the
Right.
And
state has a
Constitution
duty
morality
and
comes in. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
the state has
Right.
an obligation to propagate
To-
consent. Why is the
Right.
state silent on consent? Why do we have no public education on consent? If
Right.
it is so widely prevalent
Right.
in marriage, it must be equally widely prevalent outside marriage. In general, men are taught this entitlement to sex. Why do we have no public propaganda, no public campaigns about consent? That is what we need. Why do we not have any state investment in that?
Right. Of
That
course,
is what they should be doing.
the only response to a high profile case of sexual violence is hang the rapist. That's been the only,
Yes.
lacking absolutely any nuance. I want a final question to the two of you, but before that I want to read a couple of comments. Neetu Jha, who's a social worker, has written. She's in fact sitting in a police station as we speak, and she says the experiences that we recount here are things that she sees in a police station. She says police always say in every case कि तुम खाना नहीं बनाती, or you don't take care of your husband, उसे time नहीं देती, referring to what Miss Singh was saying here about the experience that everyday women go through in police stations when they approach them for some kind of recourse. Vashisht Nisha V says, yes, rape is rape. Either it's been done by a stranger or by a known person, including a husband. In fact, rape by a husband is even more hurtful. That brings me to the next and final question to the two
Exactly.
of you, missing. Right, missing. Can I want to ask you this? Justice Harishankar, in his reasoning, says, "quote acts which, when committed by strangers, acts which, when committed by strangers, result in far greater damage and trauma, cannot reasonably be regarded as having the same effect when committed by one's spouse." Now, I find this problematic. If I can briefly say what I feel. First of all, what is the evidence of this? Of what a survivor's experience of rape is? On what basis is the judge saying it? I would say the fact that the threat of physical proximity to a person who has just violated me and that he could continue to do so would cause me greater trauma. How do you sort of see this reasoning by the judge that the trauma is somehow lesser if your husband has raped you?
I don't think that's true. I don't think that is the lived experience of women. It may be more traumatic if your husband rapes you, and if he's raped you more than once, because you cannot do anything about that trauma. You're stuck in that relationship. You're stuck. You can't even complain about rape. And we know from the way in which women have repeated their experiences of domestic violence how much they suffer in their home. And I think it's a statement which is sort of made with some sort of blinkers on. So this is totally wrong. A woman may in fact experience more trauma when it is happening in her intimate space, because she feels she can't go anywhere, she can't tell anybody, and what is she going to do about it? So at
Right.
Also,
least
it's
have
prolonged
a
and
law
repeated.
and prolonged and repeated, because if a person is habitual, a sort of person who forces sex, he'll do it in any case. So I think it's something which the woman will feel more deeply perhaps than with stranger sex,
Right. Kavita?
because stranger sex is
Yeah,
a
that's
one-off
exactly
thing.
what I mean. I think I think if you look at the experience of married women who are caught in violent marriages, and there again, I'll say that this imagination of these, male defenders of, patriarchal defenders of this exception, their imagination is full of some kind of, there's a certain prurient imagination about these
Undermine the
encounters.
harm. yeah, they're
Yeah,
constantly
undermining the
under.
harm and imagining it in this sort of very prurient way where, it's some porno
Mm,
film in their heads. Okay. Sorry, it's not like that. If you
no,
imagine
no, I
the
was.
experience of a wife who is caught in a domestic violence situation, she is subjected to repeated battering and rape day after day after day after day after day. And all over the world, no matter whether it's a very advanced country, no matter whether she's educated or not, women caught in such situations find it very hard to break away from a domestic violence situation. Okay. We know very well that women, it takes about, 7 tries for a woman to actually manage to separate from a violent marriage. Okay. So these are not easy. And for them to say, use words like misuse so easily. And just imagine the psychological impact. It's like a sexual slavery where you are in this situation, and as Kirti said, you can't escape. You're caught in this situation. You are repeatedly subjected to this debasing kind of situation over and over and over. And very often your children are witness to it. It's a totally awful situation, even for those of us who are witnessing it from the outside. Believe me, it's traumatic even for those of us who see it, from the outside. It's very hard to cleanse your head of that kind of thing and manage, to keep sane when you see it or see such things over and over again from the outside and feel a sense of helplessness because you can't quickly have any. There is no easy, no quick solution to these things, and I find it so angering for people to say, oh, there'll be a criminal law and then there'll be all these false complaints. Are even where there is an absolutely real situation, getting even a real complaint won't solve this problem overnight. Okay.
Right.
The women won't want to file a complaint easily. Even if they file a complaint, they will not follow through with it easily. Even if they follow through with it, they won't have anywhere to go easily. And these things are very difficult.
Right.
And it's unbelievable torture. The correct word for this is actually torture. The stranger rape may be one incident, one traumatic incident, which is of trauma, which lives on and on and on, and which a victim will relive. But this is a series of traumatic, it's a long-term traumatic torture incident. It's a long-term torture, which is custodial torture. It's
Right.
basically custodial torture. Marital custodial torture is what it should be called.
Right. The subject itself is a trigger warning, so I suppose I can share this. I refer to the days when I observed these sort of cases of domestic violence, and I went to these police stations in Mumbai with this particular organization. And the case that I was referring to, where the police seemed like unwilling to accept the complaint, the woman with great difficulty was trying to tell the police that her husband was inserting a foreign object in her vagina uh, during sex, and it was so tough for it took a while for me to understand what she was trying to say, and for the police, the cop in fact then asked her to repeat what he understood what he was saying, but it was just, I don't know, like Schadenfreude
Getting a
looking at a
kick out of it.
and
Absolutely.
he wanted her to sort of he seemed to somehow sort of take some pleasure in hearing her recount what
Absolutely.
the man had done to her. So I mean, that's just like one of the many cases
And see,
that
that's
go.
one thing that Justice Chakdar has remarked. She
Right.
won't be entitled to the SOPs that are set in rape cases. That you immediately
Correct.
have to do this, show her to a doctor, get a medical examination, give her medicine, whatever it is,
Right.
see that she's looked after. But those things won't even be set in motion if it's a married woman,
Right. Well, what about
unless
access to
she goes.
therapy? Right.
Yeah, access to
There's
And
therapy is the most important thing.
right. It is in
Access
fact
to
we
therapy.
watch,
instructed.
for
Right.
those of
Yes.
us who are watching The Maid on Netflix,
Correct. Correct.
which is supposed to be a series showing the gaps in the US system, supposedly, which exists to help domestic violence victims in the US. I
Right.
watch it and I think, oh my God, that system obviously has massive glaring gaps and
Right.
racist biases and all of that. But in India, you don't even have that system. There are no shelters, virtually no shelters. The so-called shelters that exist there are no shelters that actually treat you, well and sensitively like they show you on the maid, and all of that. I mean, it's awful. So it's a terrible, terrible situation in India. Absolutely.
Right. All right. I want to close by two things from the judgment that we know. Justice Shakdar had this to say. He said, the fact that the rapist is the husband of the victim does not make the act of sexual assault any less degrading, dehumanizing, or even injurious. He says that rape as an offense deserves social disapprobation in the strongest terms, notwithstanding who the sort of perpetrator of the rape is. Also, perhaps only fitting to quote from amicus curiae Rajshekhar Rao, who said, rape is rape, a rapist remains a rapist. No amount of classification of verbal jugglery can alter that reality. He says, notably, every other woman, including a sex worker, is entitled to decline consent and prosecute for rape, a right which is simply not available to a married woman. Kavita Krishnan, Kirti Singh, I appreciate your time and the work you do, and for speaking to us here at Scroll and answering our viewers' questions. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Smita,
you.
and thank you, Scroll. Bye, Kirti.